Hello, I'm Nate, aka Beach Mutineer. Today I want to take you through a deep dive analysis of the Tower of Ishal from Dragon Age Origins, a combat-heavy location that I think is overlooked and underrated in terms of its combat encounter design. I would even go so far as to call it the best combat gauntlet that Dragon Age has to offer. I do understand why no one talks about the Tower of Ishal as one of their favorite locations though. It's not particularly flashy, it's fairly short, and you go through it at a low level as part of finishing the game's introduction. You only have Alistair and possibly the dog as permanent companions, and more importantly, other than the start and end cutscenes showing the disastrous Battle of Ostagar, there's not any story happening while you're fighting your way to reach the beacon at the top of the tower. Due to the lack of story and characters, I can't say it's one of my favorite sections of the game, because Dragon Age's strengths lie in the writing. But I've been working on some challenge playthroughs recently, and I've gained a newfound appreciation for the combat that the Tower of Ishal offers the player. If you're doing a challenge run, or you're not very knowledgeable about the game's combat mechanics, you can actually have your entire party wiped multiple times as you try to figure out how to successfully get through some of the enemy encounters in the tower. I remember during my earliest playthroughs that I was terrified of the emissary who could do so much damage to my party before they could get to him. And of course, the boss battle against the ogre at the top is a huge difficulty spike, and unless you cheese the encounter using certain strategies with knowledge that you have to have ahead of time, it's hard to beat the ogre. What I'll do with this video is analyze the design of the combat encounters and talk about what that ideally achieves for the player. I say ideally because obviously everyone's experience will be different, and what is just the right amount of challenge for some players will either be too easy or too difficult for others. There's no way to please absolutely everyone, but I do think in terms of someone's first time playing DAO, that the Tower of Ishal is just right. This is going to be part walkthrough, part analysis, a bunch of yapping from me about my favorite game, but if you've watched some of my other discussion videos, you know that's how this goes. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated, but not required. I am always thankful, even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. The Tower of Ishal is the second half of the game's prologue and leads to the climactic cutscene where Loghain betrays King Cailan and the Grey Wardens by retreating with his troops, letting the king, his troops, and the Grey Wardens all die at the hands of the Darkspawn. Before this happens, the player character, the Warden, is tasked alongside Alistair, a junior Warden, just slightly more experienced, with going to stand at the top of the Tower of Ishal in order to signal Loghain to charge with his forces at the right moment, after the Darkspawn are lured out in the open by the king's army. Of course, this seemingly innocuous task goes wrong immediately. As you approach the tower, two of the guards stationed there run towards you and alert you of the fact that Darkspawn have breached the tower from somewhere underneath. It's no longer secure, which means you'll have to carve your way through the creatures in order to reach the top of the tower and light the beacon. At this point, you will get some temporary companions joining your party so that you have a full group of 4 characters, depending on your Warden's class and origin. If you're a mage, then the tower guard and soldier will join. If you're a human noble, you'll only get the circle mage joining since you already have your dog as the third party member. All the other origins will get the tower guard and the circle mage to join. After getting a full party, you have to make your way to the tower entrance and fight the Darkspawn who are swarming the soldiers stationed here. The fights outside the tower aren't terribly difficult as long as you don't charge in recklessly into multiple Darkspawn groups at the same time. When I played the game for the first time as a kid, I think I might have died to the Hurlock Alpha at the top because I rushed through the entire area thinking I'd be able to save the soldiers if I was fast enough. Spoiler alert, without some seriously powerful heal spell cast super quickly, you can't save the soldiers. Even then, it doesn't matter if you do, they won't join you inside the tower. There are a few crates in the area right after the gate towards the tower. They're not ever going to have something super amazing, but you could luck out on getting something decently valuable, so it never hurts to loot them. The Hurlock Alpha is right next to the tower entrance, protected by some archers on the sides. It's usually best to kill the archers first, and then focus on the Alpha. There's a chest next to the door, so if you have a rogue or can bash open locks, open it for a bit of extra loot and XP. entering the tower's ground level, you'll have to deal with what is probably the hardest encounter in the entire tower, in my opinion even harder than the ogre at the top. There's one Genlock emissary who can cast a devastating fireball on your entire team, especially because there's a tripwire that sets off a grease trap. If the grease trap is set on fire, it will do extra fire damage to your team, and of course they can also slip and fall on the grease or be slowed by it. The grease will eventually dissipate once the trap is triggered, whether or not it's set aflame, so you could wait it out. But the emissary is scripted to cast that fireball even if you don't trigger the grease trap, so it's a good idea to just have one of your tanky characters walk forward through that area so that only one character is affected by the spell. If you have a two-handed warrior with the Indomitable Sustained talent, you'll be able to walk right through the grease and the fireball without getting knocked down. Other than the emissary, there are 2 bow-wielding Hurlocks near it and 3 more in a line a bit further away. Archers can be quite nasty, especially later in the game when they have access to higher tier talents. But even early on, they do a surprising amount of damage since they can keep shooting your melee characters while you slowly advance towards them. It's pretty much always imperative to target enemy spellcasters first though. The emissary can heal and of course regenerate mana to cast more spells, so target it with at least 2 of your party members or more. After it's down, you can finish off the Hurlocks. The next combat encounter is quite interesting too, not as deadly as the first one but still dangerous because it involves 2 rooms of enemies. No matter which room you enter first, the enemies from the other room will also be alerted and come to the aid of the other side. This can cause your characters to possibly get pinched in a doorway, which is a terrible place to be. So make sure to fully enter the room when you begin combat, even with your ranged characters. You don't want your squishy circle mage or another ranged character to get flanked and killed by the enemies from the other room. Finally, the stair room contains genlocks, both melee and ranged, and the exit to the second floor. This encounter is not really difficult since there's a fairly small amount of enemies and no spellcasters. I think it's a nice little confidence boost to give to the player at the end of a challenging area to make them feel pumped up to keep going. You also can't just have only difficult fight after difficult fight, because that will exhaust the player and lessen the impact of the emotions that usually arise out of engaging with a challenge. Now that we've reached a save point in the tower, let's take a look at its visual design. There's the tall arched doors of ancient Tevinter design, old stone and looming statues. I really like the ancient Tevinter architecture from Origins. It looks grand and well built, and quite oppressive due to the height of everything. The warm light from the fires combined with the cold bluish hue of the tower also adds to the feeling of a place that was supposed to be a safe haven, but has turned against its occupants. Interestingly, and perhaps as a bit of an oversight, there's a bunch of Darkspawn decor, stuff like pikes with heads on them, some skulls and other grisly bits here and there. By the time you get to the tower, it shouldn't have been very long since the Darkspawn breached it from underground, so I find that there's a bit too much of this Darkspawn decor. It makes it look like the Darkspawn have been there long enough to make the place their own. Then again, it could be some kind of territorial aggression that makes them immediately cut off heads and put them on bikes. You never know. Overall, I think the first floor of the tower is super solid and does exactly what it's supposed to do. Introduce you to the danger of the swarming Darkspawn through a series of challenges that will hopefully help you prepare for the fights to come. On the second floor, there's a larger group of enemies and they will charge as soon as you make your way into the large room. There's also 2 side rooms with 2 Darkspawn each, which you should go clear out first. Otherwise, if you just charge forward into the main group, the doors will open, and the enemies there will come to aid the others. There are some ballistas on the left side of the chamber that you could use to target the group on the right side, but I advise against it unless you're keeping your melee characters near the ballista as well. If they charge forward and you shoot the bolt from the ballista at the wrong time, you could end up damaging and possibly knocking down your own party members. The best strategy I've found is just clearing out the 2 side chambers, then charging with your entire team. The archers are the most important targets, though be sure to keep one of your melee fighters near your archers or mages to protect them from attacks. This type of encounter reinforces that you should scout out the area and see if there's additional groups of enemies you could take out early, or at least be aware of so as to not get surprise flanked by them. I do think it's a bit weird to see ballistas inside a tower, especially on a level without openings to shoot from. Why were there assembled ballistas inside? Were they planning on taking some outside by dragging them down the stairs? It doesn't make sense, and I would have preferred to see these ballistas on the ground floor instead for it to be a bit more of a realistic level design. But for the purpose of combat design, they do their job well as something fresh to spice up the encounter. The stair room functions much as before, with a small and fairly easy combat to end the floor on and have a save point to take a moment to save the game, look through your inventory, possibly equip something new, and get ready for the next level. On the third floor, you start with a little fight against some genlocks. The most difficult aspect of this encounter is that there's a genlock hiding behind a doorway on the right side. It's primed to get in an advantageous position and backstab one of your characters if you don't take care of it first. Otherwise, it's a fairly straightforward fight. The second chamber is where things get interesting, however. There are some war dogs locked up in cages, barking at the darkspawn in the room, who have a genlock alpha among them. Alistair will suggest using the lever to open the cages, and if you follow his advice, the dogs will spring into action and help you take down the darkspawn in this chamber, as well as in the other rooms past this if you draw the enemies back towards the dogs. This is an encounter meant to remind you that sometimes you can have allied NPCs assisting you in a fight, and that they can indeed be quite useful since they could give you a numbers advantage. Whether they're NPCs during certain quests like Arl of Redcliffe or the Battle of Denrim, or else summoned creatures by either the Rogue Ranger or the Mage's Animate Dead spell, it's always good to remember that if you can get a numbers advantage, you probably should. Between the Mubarak cages and the stairs to the upper floor are 3 more rooms of darkspawn and crates. The crates could have health poultices or injury kits, so I always recommend looting them. These consumables are super high impact early on. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use the remaining dogs to your advantage by luring the enemies back towards the cage room so the friendly Mabari can join the fight. The final room, as always, is fairly simple with just a few regular darkspawn guarding the stairs. At this point, take a breath, save, use any injury kits to treat your debuffing injuries if any of your characters, especially your Warden and Alistair, got knocked unconscious during any of the previous fights. The top floor is your final challenge, and of course, it's a boss fight. A short cutscene shows a huge nasty ogre eating some dead soldiers. This is a boss fight that can be very difficult for new players, since it's likely they haven't yet understood all the combat mechanics. They're not very well explained by the game either, so it's a matter of playing for long enough to figure them out, or seeking out information in guides or on the wiki. There are a few different ways to kill the ogre. The most straightforward option is to send your tankiest party member forward to keep its attention, while you try to have as many of your other characters attack from a range, or at least run away when the ogre is preparing a ram or slam attack. Make sure to keep your tanky character above 60% HP at all times through health poultices, and optionally a heal spell if your warden is a mage. If one of your party members gets to around 50% health, the ogre is guaranteed to use its grab attack, which is unavoidable and pretty much always kills whoever it catches unless they're super tanky or can be healed by a mage through the damage. But if the characters engaged in melee with the ogre are all healthy, they should be safe from the grab. If your warden is a mage, or else you have a respecialization mod for the temporary circle mage, you can pick up the force field spell to protect your melee allies from the ogre's grab. When the ogre uses the ability, just cast force field on the affected ally and they'll become immune to damage but also be paralyzed. Whenever you do that, the ogre's ability is wasted and put on cooldown, and you have time to damage it with your other party members. Be sure to keep your mage far away from the ogre though. If the mage gets grabbed, there's no way to cast force field on yourself, as you immediately become unable to use any abilities or consumables. Of course, you can also use spells like Crushing Prison or Paralyze on the ogre to disable it, but since they don't have a 100% chance to succeed, it's way better to just use Force Field as a defensive option on your melee ally. Finally, another interesting but much more cheesy strategy is to have your melee character that the ogre is targeting simply run away from the ogre while the others are attacking it from afar. The ogre's movement speed is equal to your own, so it will never catch up to you as long as you keep running. Equip the other 3 party members with ranged weapons and shoot the ogre from a safe distance. If the ogre ever gets tired of chasing that one party member and starts chasing another one, just reorganize the 1 and 3 group and start the process all over again. Before you light the beacon, be sure to loot the ogre for a nice early kite shield, Havard's Aegis, and a journeyman lightning rune. There's 2 barrels tucked on a side with a gift tribal necklace and some random loot too. Also note that anything worn by your temporary companions, so anyone who isn't you, Alistair, or the dog if you're a human noble, will be lost after you light the beacon. So if you want to keep their equipment or any extra items you may have given them, unequip those items before you proceed. After this terrible ordeal you've had to get through just in order to light a signal fire, you're treated to a wonderful cutscene that shows the wardens and the king's army being overwhelmed by the darkspawn, with Loghain watching from the sidelines and choosing to retreat once the signal is lit. You also get to see both King Cailan and Duncan dying dramatically, which always makes me very sad. To pour salt into the wound, you and Alistair are overwhelmed by a huge group of swarming darkspawn, with everything fading to black. It's not game over, though, obviously, since you wake up in Flemeth's hut afterwards, are joined by Morrigan, and start going towards Lothering as a little stop on the way before you begin your quest to unite the land against the darkspawn. But for the purpose of this video, we'll stop with the story here. I've already talked about Lothering and how it provides the player a proper introduction into the larger world of Dragon Age, gives them the freedom to explore and interact with more characters and quests than before, possibly recruit 2 companions, and get a bit of a reprieve from the super high tension of Ostagar as they gear up to gather an army and unify for Elden against the Archdemon's horde. The Tower of Ishal, however, is a different beast. As you could tell from my walkthrough of it, it's mainly just fight, 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 with challenging encounters meant to teach you how to use the game's mechanics and tactical gameplay more skillfully so that you'll be better equipped in the future to overcome the far more difficult boss fights, as well as fights against large or very dangerous groups of enemies that are to come. The Tower of Ishal is a combat gauntlet, perfectly balanced for the early levels. Without DLC items or cheesy strategies, even if you're knowledgeable about the game, it will be tough to get past some of these encounters without one or multiple party members falling unconscious. A party wipe is possible if you aren't paying attention to your positioning and target selection. I think this is a very underrated dungeon area for just how much it teaches you how to play the game. Without struggling through the tower when I first played the game in 2010 as a teenager, I would not have been able to eventually beat the Broodmother and other difficult bosses on the way to completing my first playthrough. I've mentioned this in a bunch of my videos, but I'm not a skilled gamer due to various motor skill issues and my ADHD, so I am very appreciative of whoever designed the Tower of Ishal combat encounters for taking the time to craft a bunch of different scenarios that weren't impossible to beat, but were challenging enough to make you remember what you had to do in order to move forward. I will admit that after a while, once you become knowledgeable and more comfortable with DAO's combat, the tower can get a bit boring. But you see it in an entirely new light if you try to play through it while doing a challenge run of some sort, because suddenly it's hard again and it reminds you of your first playthrough, which is a nice hit of nostalgia, but also just nice to feel challenged in a way that requires you to try out new things, experiment. I may also be slightly biased towards the earlier areas in a game, both because I tend to replay the first half or so of a game over and over again, but also because I really enjoy the early level progression in RPGs. In fact, that's a huge reason why I replay the first half of the game. It feels far more rewarding whenever you level up, whenever you find or buy a new gear upgrade, when you beat a boss rank enemy, and so on. I do recognize it's much harder to balance later areas, especially in a somewhat non-linear game like Origins, because you don't really know what level the player's party will be, what abilities and stats the player will have chosen, what gear they will have equipped their characters with. You kind of have to make it so that at least the mandatory combat encounters are able to be completed by a suboptimal party while still offering enough challenge for a better built party. Level scaling everything to the player's level makes every fight kind of boring because it ends up feeling the same, so I appreciate the way DAO tried to balance things with each area having different level ranges for most of the enemies, with some of course having a fixed level, either very low in the case of critters or very high in the case of bosses. In general, if you don't try to cheese the game with exploits or overpowered combos too much, the game offers enough of a challenge to feel good. But I still think that the Tower of Ishal and some of the other areas designed to be lower level feel much better simply due to the player's limited abilities and resources. And I don't think the fact that it's low level should take away from just how good the combat encounter design feels in this entire section. It's also just long enough for it to feel like a trial you finally pass when you reach the ogre, but not too long that it drags on, like some of the other dungeon-like areas in DAO that I'll analyze in other videos. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at the Tower of Ishal and how it functions as a perfectly balanced combat gauntlet to teach the player the skills needed to prevail in the game's later difficult fights. I'd like to know what you thought the tower was like when you first played through it, as well as how you feel about it now. I know there's a Skip Ostagar mod that I even use occasionally when I'm trying to get footage for something specific later in the game, or when I simply don't have the patience to go through the Korcari Wilds and the Tower of Ishal in a more fun and roleplay oriented playthrough. I'm curious if without the added difficulty of a challenge run, it just ends up feeling stale for experienced or skilled players, or if you still enjoy going through it regardless of the fact that you know how to solve the combat encounters. So let me know your thoughts down below. If you're looking forward to more videos about Dragon Age and other games I like, do remember to subscribe, and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.